this very often. If you go to places and you have this very long introduction, and nobody is actually interested. Half of the time, nobody is interested in the introduction. After 2 minutes, you ask them what was said about you. They don't care, and they are not interested. And my own view is that, and I'm very happy that during this occasion, we are talking about having a conversation rather than a lecture. And my good friend, Honorable Clement here, whom I've just met, I came in when the good doctor was sharing his thoughts with you, and I know that you are mentally tired. So my tone will be very conversational and alive to the realities that we are talking about today. First of all, I'm happy that the students present here are drawn from different countries in terms of where you are going to school, but I'm also aware that you are from South Sudan. I'm aware that you are from the Zande people, and you know, I do not know, but in Kenya, when we were students, we were taught about the governance systems of the Zande. And in regional geography, we also learned about the farming methods. Today, if you ask many students where the Zande come from, they have completely no idea. And that, I think, is an indictment of the kind of education that we receive. And I've been associated with South Sudan for a very long time. As a student at the university, I worked in Dr. John Garang Dimabior's office, which was located not too far from here at Yaya Center when this SPLM had just moved from Harare at that time. So, and we were part of the group of students who were proofreading the journal that was then being produced by SPLM. So I'm very familiar with the history of your country, and I've been to Juba several times. I've been to Yambio and quite a number of places in South Sudan. And I believe that the conversation we want to have around now, particularly you who are students, you who are seeking education outside of your own country, and I've listened to the poem. The poem is a lamentation, and is a lamentation that is not unique to South Sudan. In many countries, when you visit, there are those who are saying it was better while we waited. And I find that very painful when Africans, after regaining their independence, are now in a state where they say it was better while we waited. If you talk to all the people, not only in South Sudan, sometimes even in countries such as South Africa, in Zimbabwe, even in Kenya, nostalgically, they appear even to suggest that it was better during the colonial period, that it was better. That is something that is not unique to us. If you read the Christian Bible, there are moments when the Israelites were saying, it was better when we were in Egypt. Let us go back to Egypt. But that is not the kind of thing that we want to talk about. We know that we come from a history of suffering. We come from a history of humiliation. Those of you who are students of history, when you read what happened in Berlin in 1884 and 1885, the European states simply sat down and divided the continent of Africa arbitrarily into spheres of influence, so that you of the Zande nation are to be found in what is today South Sudan and to be found in what is today the Democratic Republic of Congo. And if you look very carefully, even in Central African Republic. So this is a nation divided and traumatized. If you look at different communities, the Maasai, they are to be found in Tanzania, they are to be found in what is modern day Kenya. Look at the Luo, they are to be found in Sudan, in Central African Republic, in Uganda, in Tanzania, in Kenya. And when you go through that phase, then you discover that you are traumatized throughout the ages. And that kind of trauma is indeed projected in different ways. It is also true that even when the colonialists left, they left unto us governance systems which were not very familiar to us. You of the Zande, your own kingdom was disrupted, was it in 1905? You had a governing system, a functioning governing system. And then somebody comes suddenly and says that this is not good enough. They disrupt you and you now adopt a system which is completely alien to you. It is that American John Henry Clark who said very famously that all African countries regained their independence on the basis of governance systems which were alien, which were a mimicry of European systems, and he gave this very painful verdict that none of the African countries will ever succeed on the basis of those governance systems. And if you look across Africa today, you can see how we are struggling with this European governance system. Look at Africa now as I speak. Look at the continent and look at how pain is being visited on the continent in different ways. Look at Ethiopia and see what is happening there. Even when there is peace and calm in and around Addis Ababa, you go to the Amhara region, you find there is a conflict that is going on there. You go to the Tigray region, go to the Oromo region, go to Somalia, see what is happening there. You go to Sudan now. When South Sudan seceded from what is now Sudan, see what is happening in Khartoum now, in Darfur. Go to Central African Republic, go to the northern part of Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Niger, and all these. Go to Cameroon, go to the Democratic Republic of Congo, go to northern Mozambique. There is a sense in which Africa is convulsing. And the promises that we made to ourselves when we were seeking independence, we promised those who are in positions of leadership, promised us when we gain the instruments of government, your education will improve, and the poem spoke about it. Your health systems will improve. Your infrastructure will improve. Your opportunities will be created so that if you are doctors or engineers or teachers, you will have the opportunity to serve. If you are entrepreneurs, we'll create an environment where you would conduct business. We promised that to ourselves. And we recognize that in order to achieve some of these things, we had to have unity. And that is in response to the question that you posed, that you raised. How do we benefit as East Africa? In this region, as early as the 1960s, we recognized that in order to achieve some of these gains, we had to unite as East Africa. And before 1977, we had the East African Community, East African Post and Telecommunication, East African Power and Light, East African Harbors, East African Airways. Then we broke it. Then we realized in the 1990s that we had made a mistake. And we have started this process. We started this process. So we say now, let us start with a common market. Let us have a customs union. Let us have a monetary union, and ultimately let us have a political federation. Because we know that as divided as we are, we only undermine our potential. That we remove the visas. If I want to travel to Juba, there is no reason why I should not just take the next flight and be in Juba. And if you want to come from Juba and you want to go to Kampala or Kinshasa and all these other places, that is the way it should be. Those were the promises that we made to ourselves. And it is important to note that these promises had been understood and articulated much earlier. I remember when Ghana regained our independence, in that famous speech of Kwame Nkrumah in 1957, he said that the independence of Ghana meant nothing if the rest of Africa was not free. And if you read the history of Kwame Nkrumah, he was consistently telling everybody, let us unite, because if we don't unite, then all these gains that we think we have had will disappear without a whim. If you care to read history after 1957, Kwame convened another meeting in 1958 in Accra, Ghana, convened another meeting in 1960 in Casablanca, Morocco, convened jointly with Haile Selassie another meeting in Addis Ababa, which gave birth to the Organization of African Unity, convened another meeting in 1965, 1 year before he was overthrown, with the same message, let us unite. So the whole idea of African unity, the whole idea of us working as a team is something that has always existed in the African mind since the dates of colonization, the dates of slavery. And I want to believe that some of you are students of history. If you read the history of some of African descendants such as to be found in the Caribbean, I hope that you are familiar with people such as Sylvester Williams of Trinidad and Tobago. If you read those who came up with the Pan-African movement, they say, we must unite. Because if we don't unite, then we will not realize our potential. And that message was caught up. You'll be familiar with Marcus Garvey. How many of you have heard of Marcus Garvey and Bob Marley's famous sing, Garvey was a buffalo soldier in the heart of America? Marcus Garvey, with the Lone Star, which found its place in the Ghanaian independence flag. You see the Lone Star. He had incorporated a company as early as that. And even much earlier, how many of you have ever heard of a man called Pixley Kaisaka Seme? You must read about him, Pixley Kaisaka Seme. And as I'm talking, you can even Google him, the man who founded the ANC. As a student in 1906 at the University of Columbia in the United States, he gave one of the most iconic speeches ever given by an African, where he talked about regeneration of Africa. And when he talked about regeneration, and I want to read and ask a part of that speech that Pixley Kaisaka Seme delivered in the month of April as a student at the University of Columbia, and this is what he said, among other things. The African already recognizes his anomalous position and desires change. The brighter day is rising upon Africa. Already I seem to see her chains dissolve, her desert plains red with harvest, her Abyssinia and Zululand, and the seats of science and religion reflecting the glory of the rising sun from the spire of the churches and universities, her Congo and her Gambia whitened with commerce, her crowded cities sending forth the hum of business, and all our sons and daughters employed in advancing victories of peace, greater and more abiding than the spoils of war. Yes, the regeneration of Africa belongs to this new powerful period. And this is how he concluded. Oh, Africa, like some great century plant that shall bloom, in ages hence we want thee. In our dreams see thy swamps, the prospero of our stream, the doors unlocked, where knowledge in our tomb hath lain innumerable years in gloom. Then thou shalt thou, walking with that morning gleam, shine as they, sister and brother, walk the face of the continent. Pixley Kaisaka Seme was talking about Africa regenerating herself. Why had Africa to regenerate herself? Africa had to regenerate herself because she had been abused through slavery. She had been abused through colonization, and she is still being abused through neo-colonization. And the neo-colonial project is alive and well. You go to any country, we can almost say we could have done better. South Sudan could have done better since the year 2011. Our resources, our oil, and other minerals could have been used to improve the quality of the lives of the people. But as my good brother here said, leadership has been the problem. But I also want to say that it's not only a problem of leadership, it is also a problem of followership. And I've always taken the view that leadership does not change people. Leadership simply exposes who you are. If you are a bad individual with wrong inclinations, who had no opportunity to show us those inclinations, when you occupy a position of leadership, then you are in the open. We are now able to see you for what you are. So all these people you say think that they have changed. They have not changed. They have simply exposed who they were, and the environment now exposes who they were. The flower does not change. When it opens up, we simply get to know it. We simply don't say, when a mango is planted and we see it begetting mangoes, it is who it was. This is why we have individuals and we think that they have changed. They have not changed. This is who they were. An environment now exposes them for who they are. And followership. What are the kind of individuals who follow you? So when you are blaming those who are in positions of leadership, do you also blame yourselves? If a South Sudanese politician were to come here and you are students, would you not expect them to give you some money? And where have they received that money from if they have not stolen it? Because if they are only earning their salaries, how do they share it with you? How would they survive? So we must also blame ourselves. The quality of leadership is determined by the quality of followership. And if you doubt me, look at the countries where the population makes demands of their leaders. And some of them are to be found outside of the continent of Africa. Look at countries in the Scandinavia. Look at Norway, a little country with a population which is just slightly more than, less than that of South Sudan. Same natural resource, oil. And look at what they have, the sovereign fund of Norway, the sovereign fund. Money kept aside for the population is $1 trillion United States dollars. $1 trillion United States dollars. Does South Sudan have a sovereign fund? Does Nigeria have a sovereign fund? Does Namibia have a sovereign fund? Do we keep for the future generations? These are the things that we must ask ourselves. When you acquire education, why are you acquiring this education? What do you want to do with it? You are in Kenya here acquiring education. You are in Uganda acquiring education. You are in Ethiopia acquiring education. You are in South Sudan acquiring education. What is your life's plan with what you have acquired through university education or through college education? These are the questions that we must ask ourselves. But unfortunately we don't. We don't ask difficult questions because we don't want answers. The answers will make us uncomfortable, and we do not want to be uncomfortable. So we ask questions whose answers we know, because we can dare not ask the question that ought to be asked. So today, as you gather here, it is Nyerere who said in, I think this was on the 6th day of March 1997. It was the 40th anniversary of the celebration of the independence of Ghana. And he said, our generation has played its part. We participated in bringing about political independence from the colonizers. The duty of the next generation is to improve and to bring change in the economic arena. This was giving meaning to that famous statement by Kwame Nkrumah, seek ye first the political kingdom and the rest will come. we sought and obtained the political kingdom, and the rest has refused to come. Even the political kingdom which we thought that we gained, I doubt whether we did. Because in many ways, you find that we are confused. We are confused about the constitution that we ought to have. We are confused about elections. We are confused about many things. At one time I said that one of the things that Africans cannot do is to count votes. For some reason, in almost all African countries, we are unable to count votes. We count everything else. Money we count very well. Counting ourselves, even population census, that one we also don't count very well, because we think it has political implication. So we inflate the number of people or reduce the number of others. But when it comes to counting votes, Africans for some reason are totally incapable of counting votes. Even when you bring machines to help them to count, even those machines refuse to count. In other parts of the world, you conduct an election where the voting population is even 100 million. The following day, you know who the winner is. But in Africa, you are counting 8 million votes, 4 million votes, and it takes 3 days to count the votes. And even when the results are brought about, nobody agrees what number of votes were cast. And that is because we have a trust deficit in Africa. We don't have faith in ourselves. We don't have faith in the things that we do. And I'm suggesting to you that it's your generation that must bring about a different ethos. And out of that ethos, a different ethic. Because ethics is the child of ethos. What defines who you are? Who is a Kenyan? If you ask, what makes a Kenyan a Kenyan? What makes a South Sudanese a South Sudanese? What makes a Tanzanian a Tanzanian? What makes a Ugandan a Ugandan? This is the kind of argument that Kwame Nkrumah did not want us to have. He said, these things you call Tanzania, and I think Nyerere also said that when we go out into the world and we interact with the rest of the world does not care about our Angolan-ness, about our Tanzanian-ness, about our Ugandan-ness, about our South Sudan-ness, about our Sudan-ness, about our Somali-ness. They only see us as Africans. And therefore, what we should do is to define ourselves as Africans. What do we stand for in education? What do we stand for in health? What do we stand for in trade? What do we stand for as persons who descend from the African continent? And what do we want for ourselves? Today, it is easier to move from Dubai to Kenya than for a South Sudanese to move from Juba to Dubai than it is for a South Sudanese to move to South Africa. It is more difficult for a Malian to move from Bamako in Mali to Dakar in Senegal, and it is easier for a British to move from London in England to Lomé in Togo. How can we allow such a thing to happen? How can we grow when we have those difficulties? How can we grow when South Sudan is importing her goods through Kenya and they have roadblocks? How can we grow? How can we grow when at the whims of a politician we close the borders and disrupt trade? How can it be when a student from Juba cannot transfer his or her credits to Makerere University or to the University of Dar es Salaam, while under the Erasmus program a student from Copenhagen in Denmark can transfer his or her credits to the University of Lund in Sweden? How can it be? How can we grow? When we say we have the numbers, 1.5 billion of us, numbers without commerce mean nothing, they are just a burden. When I travel nowadays and I go to many airports in Africa, I see our young girls being taken or taking themselves to Saudi Arabia or to Qatar or to Dubai, and they are going to serve there. We are exporting and encouraging what is fundamentally modern day slavery. And we do not know it and we do not want to accept it. But these are the things that you who are present here, you who have the privilege and opportunity of being exposed to education. These are the questions that you must ask yourself. Is the world the better? Is South Sudan a better place because you went to school? Or you are acquiring education that you may run away to the United States of America because they are now offering visa opportunities for skilled persons? Are you acquiring your computer knowledge that you may run away to Canada? Are you acquiring your engineering qualification that you may run away to Germany and Australia? Are you running away, and when you have your children, will you want them to be citizens of other places other than South Sudan? Or citizens of East Africa? These are the questions that you must have in your mind as you interact with the world. I have no doubt in my mind that exposures such as these are necessary. I have no doubt in my mind that you have the desire to do good. I have no doubt in my mind that the things that can change East Africa can't be made to happen by yourselves. You may blame some of the individuals who are in positions of leadership in your country, but there was a time when indeed they sacrificed. There was a time when they were age mates and they sacrificed education. They did not go to school that they may liberate you. All of them have sinned and fallen short of the glory of both God and man. But yet there is a sense, as John Garang de Madior used to say, that before you blame anybody, bring forth 2 baskets. And ask that of those 2 baskets, their mistakes be placed in one and their successes be placed in one. And when those baskets are full, weigh them. And if the successes outweigh the failures, say, he or she made his contribution. The question is, what contribution are you making? What contribution are you going to make? To be good citizens of South Sudan and good citizens of East Africa. It is not easy because there are those within South Sudan and those within East Africa who love that South Sudan should remain divided, who love that South Sudan should remain in the state in which it is. There are those who love that East Africa should remain divided. There are those who love that Africa should remain divided. But yet, we have a duty to work towards unity. And we are not talking about the unity of the graveyard where there is no contestation. We are talking about the unity that is created through competition of ideas, where good ideas prevail over inferior ideas, and everybody acknowledges that we are moving in the right direction. I believe you have the intellectual wherewithal. I believe that you have the temperament. I believe that you have the duty, but you must have the drive in the knowledge that the journey that you are embarking on is not a journey for the faint-hearted. It is a journey that requires that you fall and rise again, and fall and rise again, because success lies in rising again and again. It can be done, it must be done, and it must be remembered that this is an intergenerational struggle. Yours is to play your part. Thank you. Receive questions, which is what I think is more useful. Beautiful.
We heard another microphone.
Feel free to ask questions, eh? Yes, feel free to ask questions. Ask as many as you can.
We take 3 in a row and I answer. 3 and I answer. Yes, sir. You can just raise it and repeat it and then.
Okay, thank you so much. My question is that many times I've heard that a mentor is someone you should meet and someone that you interact with. So we would like to ask, is it possible for you to have some of us from South Sudan, for you to mentor us to carry on with the mission of freeing Africa? Because this is a real fight that we need to prepare for. So
Thank you.
Thank you. Somebody else, you take from this. You want to ask one? Ladies, please feel free to ask questions. Sir?
Yes, thank you. My name is Abakuk. I'm studying in Bardar University, pursuing my bachelor's degree in agricultural economics.
Which university?
Bardar University.
Baghdad.
Yes, Ethiopia.
I hope there's peace there now.
Yes,
State of
somehow.
emergency.
He's saying somehow.
Yes, I would like to ask a question. Earlier on, I was reading about PLO Lumumba Foundation, and I would like to ask a request, because the foundation is doing great. How can you establish work in South Sudan for South Sudanese to be mentored? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Let's take this and then we answer, then we come out.
We'll come on that side.
Thank you. Mine will be very brief. In a country like South Sudan, where there is silence in the mouth of those we believe should build hope. If you were given opportunity today to face the President Salva Kiir, what would be your true advice on his face? Thank you.
As I answer this question, I want somebody to Google a poem called If by Rudyard Kipling, and then we'll read it. If.
Please Google.
I can answer those.
Yes, please.
1. I hold a different view about mentorship. I hold the view that you can be mentored in different ways, and sometimes that even the mentor is mentored by the mentee. Because I'm in this business of mentoring people, and I have some of my young mentees who also mentor me, because they tell me something that I did not quite. There is one of them in Tanzania who has just written a book about leadership, and some of the things, I watch him occasionally. 2 of my big mentees in Africa, in fact 3. One is called Joramu, who in Tanzania. He's very busy in the social media, and Ture and Wodemaya. These are young people who, even as I mentor them, they also mentor me. Because there are certain areas of interaction where they are at, where I'm not. And it's also possible to be mentored by people you never met. You never met at all. When I go to Indian audiences, and I consider myself to be a student of Mahatma Gandhi, whom I had never met at all, but you come to my house, as he was talking, I have almost every book about Mahatma Gandhi. So Mahatma Gandhi is my mentor. I never met him, but I've interacted with his ideas. The film Gandhi that was made by Sir Richard Attenborough, I watched it 8 times. 8 times, and every time I went there I was taking notes. That was in 1983 when I was a university student. You come to my office, there is a portrait of Mahatma Gandhi. So it is possible to be mentored by somebody that you've never met at all. And there are quite a number of people whom I consider to have been my mentors. Kwame Nkrumah, whom I never met. But if you go to Ghana today, because I am one of the few people who talk about Nkrumah much more often, and for that reason the Nkrumah family thinks that I'm his mentee. And for that reason I was the 11th Kwame Nkrumah lecturer at the University of Cape Coast. I consider myself to be a mentee of Patrice Lumumba, for whom I am named, who died before I was born. And only 2 weeks ago, his grandson came to my office, looked for me and came to my office here in Nairobi. Because they hold the view that I am a mentee of Patrice Emery Lumumba. And when you are mentored by somebody, you'll not be mentored by angels. In fact, even this idea that angels are perfect is not true. If it was not true, where did Lucifer come from? Somebody can mentor you in different ways. Look at Clement here. We've just interacted, we've exchanged. As I get to know him, there are positive aspects of him that may be attractive to me. And in that manner, he could be my mentor. But his bad habits are not for it. In other words, you must also be able, because there is no perfect human being that you are going to look for. So ignore. Like today, when I mentor my young people, we have our foundation. We are present in 50 African countries. Even in South Sudan, we are present in Juba. And we have now started, during this year, we have what we call monthly mentorship meetings. And some of the people that I'm mentoring, I've never met them, but they are members of our foundation. They have met me virtually. So what do? I tell them the whole idea of mentorship is multifaceted. If I'm your mentor, I'm able to tell you, if I was if I knew what I know now at your age, I would not have done this thing that I did. In other words, a mentor tells you, because I did not have the advantage of mentorship, I stepped on this landmine. Don't step on it. The other day, I was in Lagos, Nigeria, and I met a man called Cosmos. He's a Nigerian. He's very active. If you look, you Google, you find the biggest motor company in Nigeria called Kochais. It's called Cosmos Maduka. And when he talked, he did not go through formal university education. He now has 100 degrees. But he said he always had a vision to be a multi-billionaire. He's now a multi-billionaire in Nigeria. And he said when he was growing up, he had his vision next to his bed. Every day he wakes up, he said, I want to be a multi-billionaire. And he ended up being, I'm not saying that when you do that, you'll be a multi-billionaire. But the whole idea that you have a goal that you are working towards. And he said something, you must always have a minimum of 7 sources of income. How many of you are thinking like that? At age 30, you must begin to think like that. There are people in your family who could not have them because their life was sacrificial that you may go to school. Some of you are sacrificing, therefore you cannot have 7 sources of income or whatever sources of income. But what you cannot do, you tell your mentees to do, because there is no greater recompense for a teacher and a mentor than to produce mentees who surpass him or her. Your mentee should be better than you, and you should help them because they are standing on your shoulders. So, that can be done. My brother Mukanipare met me on social media. And when he did so, we got in touch. And when he came here, I invited him to my home. And he's been there twice, and he's brought me gifts. That is how we met. He says I'm his mentor. I say he's also my mentor. So you now live in a totally different space where the virtual world now enables you to interact in a totally different way. I was in Bamako, Mali last week, and I met people from different parts of the world. They say, oh, you are my mentor. I've been listening to you. And I also say, I know you. Yesterday I was talking to somebody in Somalia, in Mogadishu, and he was a presidential candidate. He was introducing himself to me. I said, don't introduce yourself. I know about you since the year 2015. So you can see how social media has really changed things. So I believe that you can have, but it is true to say that if you have somebody who holds your hand, whom you look up to on a daily basis, it can be more effective. we are in a Catholic facility here, that is how the monasteries work, that you have somebody, an abbot, that you look at them and that kind of thing. But if you look even at the Catholic Church, this Pope here, Pope Francis, he says that Francis of Assisi was his mentor. Francis of Assisi lived many years before he was born. If you look at Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger, who is Pope Benedict XVI, the reason why he picked the name Benedict is because he believed that Pope Benedict was his mentor. If you look at John Paul, it is the same thing. They thought that John and Paul were their mentors. You who is named Habakkuk. Have you ever read the book of Habakkuk in the Bible? Go and read it, the lamentation of Habakkuk. Habakkuk could be your mentor. So there is a sense in which mentorship is a multi-pronged thing. And I think one of the things that we must do is humility. I listened to the good doctor as he was summarizing to you the important ingredients of leadership, and I can't agree more with him. I can't agree more with what he summarized as indeed the essence, because the occupation of positions of power and privilege also exposes who you are, and that is why you must be limited. You must have people who are able to take friends who are able to tell you, no, don't cross this path. And they are few and far between. When you occupy positions of power, we now want to sing your praises. We say you are the best thing since sliced bread. Because we now are thinking of the benefits that you will have. Nyerere said in 1965, when Kwame Nkrumah invited leaders in Accra, Ghana, that he was going to announce the formation of African Union. And Nyerere reports that when that conference failed, there was no unity for Africa, many leaders sighed in relief, saying, oh, we thought we were going to live here and our presidential titles would have disappeared. Unity is not easy. For people to say that I was the president of this, I'm no longer the president, it is not easy. You who come from African countries, you look at this and you look at the way cabinet ministers move in convoys. You talk about traffic jams, they have no idea what a traffic jam. I don't know whether Honorable Clement here moves in that style in Cuba. but when you are used to those trappings, it is not easy to leave them, to abandon them. It requires constant reminder. I was a mentee of Julius Kambarage Nyerere face to face when he had left being the president. And at one time we were driving, he was being driven, only one car, one driver and one bodyguard in Dar es Salaam. That was one of the simplest human beings that Africa has ever produced. And he spoke about it. But how many Nyereres do we have in the world? You who live in Kenya, you find somebody called MCA or minister here, and they think that upon being appointed MCA or minister, that is the day you begin to break the law. If I was to be asked, and I've said it publicly before, if I was to tell Salva Margaret Kir, I would say, God has given you the opportunity to serve South Sudan. This is the time to leave the stage. Preside over transition, and then history will remind you and remember you fondly. I've said this publicly before elsewhere. and I think that, and I've said this not only of him, I said this of Robert Mugabe, and while I was in Zimbabwe, and they told me if you are Zimbabwean, we would have arrested you immediately. I said, no matter how good a dancer you are, you must know when to leave the stage. Sure. Because if you stay for too long, then you begin to lose the vision and the focus. If you imagine to yourself, and I hope this is Chatham rules, if you imagine to yourself, if in the forthcoming elections in the month of December, John Garang, or rather Salva Kiir and Riek Machar were to say, we fought for this country, we have served this country, we will no longer seek public office. We will preside and ensure that South Sudan has credible leadership, and we'll be in the background. If you make mistakes, we'll come and tell you. This is what Nyerere said in 1995. He said, if God allows, I want to be a Tanzanian citizen and see at least 2 presidents. And he did. He saw Ali Hassan Mwinyi and he saw Benjamin William Mkapa. He said it. He says, so that when I leave, when he was asked for the first time, what do you want to do? He said, do you want to step down? He said, no, first I'll not step down. I'll step aside. And what did he mean? He said, I'll stop being the president of Tanzania and to become the chairman of Chama cha Mapinduzi. And after I'm convinced, then I step down. And then I'll go to Butiama. And don't call me unless I call you. And I think that was amazing. The greatness of Nyerere, the greatness of Mandela is that. That is what I would tell His Excellency the President. As to whether he would listen is a different debate. Yes. Thank you. Let's take 3 from this side.
All right. This to you. Well, hands are many. I'll start with the lady this time. Yes, the lady this time. It's going to give them a chance. Pole wanaume.
Thank you so much, MC, and thank you so much, Professor. Mine, just like you said, a lady, it's a concern for the women. In South Sudan, and I think the world all over, there is a conflict between human rights, women rights, and culture. Now in South Sudan, culture is diverse because most of the communities are just realizing the modern world and all that. So the culture is so intact. So with such a community, how can you get into, or how can you get through these different communities and marry all these 3, the human rights, women rights, and culture, so that you can avoid heavy conflicts, which will bring growth both socially and economically in the country.
I get your point.
Thank you very much.
To answer the question, I want you to Google an article written by Sylvia Tamale called When the Hen Begins to Crow.
All right.
When the Hen Begins to Crow by Sylvia Tamale.
Please Google that, eh?
Yeah. And you read it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I am really pleased to meet my mentor today for the first time.
There you go.
Yeah, a Pan-Africanist. I am a law student at Dayton University of East Africa in Kampala, Uganda.
Okay.
Then I am lawyer by Yasona. Then my question that I wanted to ask is that I have been stuck somewhere. That's why I want the mentor to be guided today.
Yes.
The question is, we have seen that Africa has grown ideologically. We have sufficient and solid ideas on the table. But the issue is how to implement them. So what must we do in all the African states to implement those ideas that can unite Africa, from restricting them, from staying, even in East African community in Uganda, with the South Sudanese, we pay $120 for a student pass, and Kenyans, they pay $20. So what must we do to adjust this to provide equality among the integration itself before we look at the concept of Africa?
Thank you very much.
So much.
Thank you very much.
All right, let me get in front. I've asked so many questions. Let me go back. The tallest man.
Thank you, MC. I've been looking for this chance. Really delighted to meet with Professor Lumumba today. It has been my dream. I'm John Dow, a student from Tangazo University doing education. Well, Professor, I have a very short question.
Yes.
As you have seen, South Sudan is a young country that need many ideas. And I quote in one of your saying that the problem with South Sudan is that there are leaders with power, but also there are other leaders with ideas, you see. So this is one of the important things. Now, as South Sudan need many ideas and young minds, we need political ground and a conducive environment for young politicians to participate in the ruling of the country. But we see that South Sudan is not conducive, whereby as young leaders and young people to participate in the politics of the country, as we are worried about lives, and as well also in neighboring countries, when politicians or young politicians are trying to come up with ideas, they are not also serving in neighboring countries like Kenya, Uganda, and other places. So how can we come up with such kind of things? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We take the three, and then we'll take one from this side as we close.
Let me start with your question. I want to give you something that Honorable Clement is here. One of the things that I want you to do, if you can, out of the deliberations of this two-day interaction, prepare a memorandum which is very well worded. That memorandum should be addressed to His Excellency President Salva Kiir, in which memorandum you clearly indicate how you want to be useful to President Salva and ask for audience with President Salva before you blame him. Can you do that? Put all those ideas. You see, one of the things that I do as a matter of course, so that when you see me coming out publicly on anything, it is not easy for somebody to say that I did not write to them. I write to all African heads of state, and I ensure that the letters reach them, all of them, all the 54 of them, so that when I come out publicly, I'm now able to say, but I wrote to you on these very same things. In Rwanda, only about last year, when we were the chair of the AU Commission, Mohamed Faki, and he was in the back, I told him, you don't respond to letters. I cause letters to be delivered, but you don't respond. But they are African heads of state who, when you write to, will respond. Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, Paul Kagame, Chakwera, the late John Joseph Pombe Magufuli, would respond to your letter and cause his office to call you. So I want you to try that, so that you say that we as students of South Sudan, drawn from different countries, met and we saw the problems that our country is going through with the war in Khartoum, with the internally displaced persons, and we have ideas, and we are requesting to have a conversation with you, and he can cause that to happen. I want you to do that, so that you can say, we wrote to him, but he never responded. East African community. You know, we have written a book about East African communities, a book which we have edited, I think. I'll give you the title. It's called East Africanness. And we also have people who have written, just Google the book, it's called East Africanness, Korwa, Adar, and others. We are 9 editors. And in that book, we have different articles, even from South Sudan, in which we say why we have a problem with the question of unity. You know, if you look at the problem we now have, and this is part of the problem that must be, this is one of the problems that must be solved after East African Community 1. East African Community 1 collapsed in 1977, and one of the reasons that was given is what was called the Nairobi mentality. The Nairobi mentality meant that Kenya always felt that they were superior to all the other countries. And it collapsed for that reason. Then in the year 2004, there was an attempt to fast-track integration. The chairman of the fast-tracking committee was the then Attorney General of the Republic of Kenya, Siswila Amos Wako. When I appeared before them, I told them that this idea at fast-tracking political integration will fail. Because the treaty says you start with a common market, a customs union, a monetary union, and ultimately a political federation. He told me, oh no, you are Pan-African, but you don't want unity. I told him, no. It will fail because you are reversing the system of metamorphosis. You start with an egg first, then it becomes larva and pupa, and then another, not in the reverse. So what happened? According to the fast tracking, we ought to have had the first East African president in the year 2010. We ought to have had a monetary union, I think, by single currency by 2014 or 2013. It failed. Because one of the things you want to do, well, the European Union, which learned from us, the European Union has what they call the Copenhagen rules. Before you admit a member, the member becomes a candidate. And during the candidature period, there are certain things that you require of them to do. That is why Turkey, for example, has remained a candidate for almost 10 years. Saying, you must do this, your economy must do this, your economy must do this, your economy. But in East Africa, we do not have any rules that say this is the litmus test that you must have before you become a member. But that is gone, and now we have South Sudan, we have Somalia, and we have the Democratic Republic of Congo, and we also have multiple memberships in regional bodies. DRC Congo is also a member of Central Africa, is a member of SADC. Tanzania is also a member of SADC. So there is split loyalty. And some of these things, take for example the visa question. One of the things that we wanted under the East African community was that there would be uniformity and harmonization of education. And Honorable Clement knows this. We were trying to harmonize our education so that if you are a student of engineering at the University of Juba, and in second year you want to move to the University of Makerere, you move seamlessly. Now see what we are doing in Kenya. We have something called CBC. We can't even decide whether grade 9 is in primary school or is in secondary school. So nobody is understanding our system of education in Kenya. But one would have thought that from South Sudan to Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi perhaps would give them a few more years because they came from a different tradition, and even Somalia. But we would say that after 10 years, we are moving in this direction. We would also say that if South Sudan is importing goods from the port of Mombasa, you don't levy the kind of thing that right now as I speak, there are several containers from South Sudan which are detained at the port of Mombasa because we unilaterally just import them from South Sudan. And the South Sudanese have said, we are not going to pay this. So these are the kind of things, customs union and then a monetary union, so that you don't have the South Sudanese bound, the Ugandan shilling, the Tanzanian shilling, the Rwandese amafaranga. It cannot and should not happen. But this is easier said than done. Because in my view, we don't have leaders who are champions for integration. The same thing you can see in the African continent. We have the African Continent Agenda 2063 and the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. But what are we doing to facilitate the movement of goods? What are we doing even to ensure that if this product, this water product, if this is a Kenyan product, will the South Sudanese Bureau of Standards accept our standardization? Not as yet now. Even in terms of practice of law. When I was the director of the Kenya School of Law, there were people who wanted to say that South Sudanese students should not join the Kenya School of Law. We allowed them. But today, when you are admitted in Kenya, can you practice in Sudan and vice versa? So it's a long journey, but I think these are some of the things that we ought to grapple with so that we don't have the fees that you are paying 120. In the European system, if you are a student in Copenhagen, and you are a member of Copenhagen is not a good example, a student in the Czech Republic, and you are in Poland, then the fees is uniform. Even lectures are conducted by lecturers virtually. My good friend, the good doctor here, could sit in his office in Nairobi or in Juba or in Kampala and addressing students at the University of Rotterdam on a particular subject on European integration. This is what we should be working towards. And you, the younger generation, you are the ones who are going to make this possible. It is not going to be easy. Because even as we talk integration, we are very narrow in the manner in which we think. Sovereignty has become so important. Local politics is so attractive to us, so ethnic sometimes that you wonder. Suspicion is so deep, it is not easy. So, do I see East Africa integrated in the manner in which I want in the next 10 years? No, I give it 50 years. It's sad to say this, but I think realistically, we must solve our domestic contradictions before we can talk of viable East African community. There are too many domestic contradictions as of now that to say that it's going to happen in the next 10 years is not as easy as one would say. Take, for example, the monetary union. We now say we are going to have it in 2032. Yeah. 2032. But what are we doing internally to begin to move us in that direction? Because if we say that we are going to have a shilling as our unitary monetary unit in East Africa, I would have wanted to see the national parliaments beginning to move in that direction about our economies. That is what Europe did. Europe told countries such as Greece, they told them the anchor currency at that time, it was not spoken, but it's going to be the German Deutschmark, for example. Now you, the Greeks, with your drachma, we want your economy at both macro and micro level to begin to do certain things. You Italians with your lira, we want you to move in a particular direction. You Spaniards with your peseta, we want you to move in a particular direction. And work is then being done at universities and central banks, and all these is moving in that direction. I don't see that. Democratic Republic of Congo expels East African communities, stand by force. Suspicion. They want to build a wall between themselves and Rwanda. Burundi, I don't know how many of you have been to Burundi at the airport. It takes you 1 hour to fill a form to get into Burundi as an East African, as a citizen of East Africa. You go to the Democratic Republic of Congo, as you come out, you must pay $50. These are the things that you are talking about. And I hope that it will not be, I'm telling you 50 years, I pray it will be shorter, but that to me is more realistic. Because some of these things are also income generation. When Kenya said we were eliminating the visa, I think we were quickly reminded, you are losing millions. Then we introduced something is called electronic what? Something electronic, where you pay $32. Then we excluded the East African communities because we knew that they also reimpose it. So if we don't move as one, then there will always be this contradiction. Then your last question about culture. The post-colonial African country is in trouble in many ways. South Sudan has almost 60 nations. 60. I call them nations, not tribes. 60 nations. 64 nations. Look at the Democratic Republic of Congo, 233 nations. Tanzania, 160. Nigeria, over 300. These are nations with distinct governance system. You, the Zande people, you have your own system of governance. Then you are put together, suddenly together, and you've got to make it work. Compare that with the European nation. European nations are nation states. And where there are no nation state, they are problem. Look at the so-called United Kingdom. You go to Scotland, they are running their own little government in Scotland. They are complete with the parliament. You go to the Irish, they have their own parliament, complete with the parliament in Stormont. It's the English who don't have it, and I think the Welsh also now want it. Yeah, the Welsh Assembly. In other words, they are respecting those. So, and you go to Sweden. The Sweden is the Swedes and a small Sami population, and they have a Sami parliament. Go to Norway, go to Denmark, and of all the European nations, if you went to the former Soviet Union, if you look at how the countries broke up, it was on the basis of nations. The Turkmenistans, the Armenians, the Azerbaijanis, the Ukrainians, the Polish. But here you are in South Sudan, Zande, Nuer, Dinka, Ocholo, Alur, and the Luo. You've got to work on it. My prescription is on governance, and there is a book, a friend of mine who has written a beautiful book, his Nanya is a traditional ruler in Ghana called Nana Kobinan Ketsia, Culture and Governance in Africa, the Ghanaian Paradigm. I think that Africa must be bold enough to re-examine governance. And I'm saying that there are elements in traditional governance which ought to be incorporated in how we govern, so that the center remains a coordinating center. It can't be done. Do I have an answer? No. I'm saying that we must collectively search for that answer. If you go to Ethiopia, the Oromo people have their own system, and there is a book called Oromo Democracy under their Gadda system. The Amhara have their own system. The Tigray have their own system. All these contradictions, if we don't address them, will merely be postponing the problem. And I think that it's important that we are able to say, for example, that there are aspects of our culture which can be incorporated into governance, so that the center remains with things like security, education, foreign affairs, national security, and policy coordination. But there are aspects of governance which can be local. And I would want to know, I don't know who is a student of political science here. What do they teach you on political science? I would want to know. Because if they are teaching you about Adam Smith and and Hobbes and all, then we are getting it wrong. We must be teaching about contemporary governance. Look at this constitution that we give to ourselves. And I was involved, and I've written about the Kenyan constitution quite extensively. But look, we just are recreating what we borrowed from our colonizers. That's why we don't even respect the constitution, because it's alien to us. If you look at our speakers, the way they dress like some fellows in Middle England. We complete with horsehair. And rules which make no sense, requiring you to wear a suit, so that if you came in a traditional set, you say you are naked. So I think that there is some element of re-examination of governance that we must get into. And I'm not saying that we go back to how we were doing this. I think there are elements which can be incorporated. And I am a great protagonist of having a Pan-African Union, because it will de-emphasize some of these things. Because ultimately, what do we want? If you go to a typical Nuer in South Sudan, you go to a person who is Dinka born, or you go to a Cholo, whom you call Shiluk sometimes, or you go to the Luo, you ask them what do they want. They just want a good hospital. They want good education. They want good roads. It is the politicians who remind you, oh, you are Nuer, because it is useful to them to divide you at that level. At the level of daily operations, those differences don't make sense. It's actually cultural difference is to be celebrated. Which is what brings me to the question that you ask. Culture is something that is dynamic. One of the problems that you will see, and I think our understanding of culture is that culture is something that was frozen in the Middle Ages, and we now are reviving culture. Culture is dynamic. And if you look at many of the things which we call culture, many of them were actually there for purposes of dealing with specific things. Because even prisons, how many of you, did the Zande people, those of you who are from the Zande nation, did you have prisons among the Zande where you take people who have committed crimes and you keep them and feed them because they have committed a crime? They were not there. There were no prisons. There were sanctions which were different. You would be expelled from the community, then you go outside there, you'd be ostracized, you'd be stopped from buying goods in the market. And if you see how we deal with prisons, it tells you we don't know how to handle prison. So culture, taboos were created for purposes of not doing certain things. So when women, for example, in modern day, there is now the push to have women in positions of leadership. But in many African communities, women were very powerful, but in an informal way. But the white man has now taught us that we must have women-only seats, for example. In the United States of America, do you have women-only seats? Not in Parliament, in the US. Have you ever heard that there are seats reserved for women? In England, do you have seats reserved for women? But here, we must have them. In other words, we must also redefine what leadership is all about and the role of women. I have no doubt in my mind that with modern day education, we use the word modern guardedly, women have opportunity. And it is also true that culturally women have had certain disadvantages. There are certain African cultures that disadvantage women and ought to be addressed. But that can be done within the context of our understanding. And if you look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948, these rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948 were made in Paris before none of the African countries was independent. That is why when you look at when the African Union or the AU came into force, you now see the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. Because we are emphasizing certain rights that are not individual rights. You can only enjoy them as a group. The Europeans became too individualistic and rights must therefore be individualistic, but there are communities where you can only enjoy certain rights as a group. And those rights are now being mainstream. But because, and this is what I conclude with, we Africans also suffer from what I call, use a psychiatric term, schizophrenia. We are conflicted. When we sit here, we are speaking in a foreign tongue, is learning political science. Some of you are engineers, some of you are lawyers. And you go to your rural village next to Central African Republic, nobody cares whether you are studying political science. So the transition that Africans go through is dramatic and is on a daily basis. You are in Juba, you are working very well in Juba. You are working very well in Yambio. You are working very well in different parts of South Sudan. You have bought a house, but in Africa, those houses don't count. When you die, we take you to your room. I don't know whether that is true. Yeah. But a European who has moved from a house, as in Copenhagen, he lives in a 2-bedroom apartment, that is his home, we'll bury him in a cemetery. Can you be buried in a cemetery? We'll take you to your real homes. When you want to get married in church, you've got to go through several steps. It says they are married in church, but what about Sunday customary law? So these contradictions also make it very difficult, because you have gone to school. He is a doctor, he is a PhD holder, big man who has gotten Western education. But when he wants to marry now, if he comes from the Shilluk people or Zande people, he now must marry under Zande customary law. You can see the contradiction. The white man in a similar position does not have those contradictions because culture evolves. So what we are doing now is their culture. So those contradictions will always be there. And you who are in the movement, women movement, must always appreciate that culture is something that moves very slowly and cannot, in the nature of things, be changed simply because there is an imposing imperial culture that has come. It's not going to be easy, but time will change these things over the years. I think I've answered all the questions. I can take 2 more, and then we go.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, because in the interest of time, we will pick one lady from this side and one gentleman from this side. Yeah, she has been raising her hand since time immemorial. Please make it as short as possible and straightforward, right? Kindly.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. It's really such an honor to render this question to PhD Lumumba. My question goes to industrialization of East Africa as a whole. You find out that in Congo we have a lot of minerals, in South Sudan, Western Equatoria, where I come from. There are a lot of minerals, Uganda, Kenya, and everywhere. And we have very beautiful, vast land for agriculture too. But we find it easier to mine our minerals and then we take it outside East Africa to places like, to outside countries so that they can be tested there, turned into valuables, and then import them back again at an interest for us to again sell, like they bring them and sell them to us. Why can't the East African leaders come together and get the necessary materials? Because I know they say there is no money, but there is money because they waste money all the time. And build up an industry that will be dealing in these different things, agriculture, the minerals and all that.
You've made the point.
Yes.
Thank you very much. One gentleman. Let me see. Let me give this great man the opportunity.
Yes, thank you so much. And it's such an honor to speak before Prof. Lumumba. My question is directly concerned about the election. One, Professor, I'm stuck. There is a will of politicians or parties, and there is a will of citizens, and then we adhere to election that is soon coming. According to the roadmap on the agreement, the past 3 months, when we realized it was about 30% that has been implemented according to the roadmap. Now, the months are close to the election. I want to ask whether this election that is coming is from the will of citizens or will of political party. That is the question that I want to ask. And what do you advise? Between peace and election, which one is paramount? Thank you.
Thank you very much. You know, I will answer. If I was a diplomat, I would not have answered that question. I would have answered the question this way. That is a matter that's for the people of Sudan, people of Southern Sudan, in their collective wisdom, will determine what is in their best interest. That is a diplomatic, politically correct answer. But as a person who, in my view, understands that number one, South Sudan has had a short and difficult history. As a person who is familiar with a number of the processes that have taken place from the CPA to the revitalized agreement, as a person who understands that the events that were contemplated under the revitalized agreement have not been realized, as a person who understands that the ongoing conflict in Sudan is also affecting quite a number of things in Sudan and in South Sudan, and therefore appreciating all these difficulties, I would myself first suggest that all Sudanese factions, those who are part of the revitalized agreement and those who did not sign, be persuaded to come to the table. And once they have come to the table to assess the situation, and after the situation has been assessed, to ask themselves the fundamental question whether the roadmap as it exists today is realistic. And once they have determined that it is unrealistic, as I think it is now, to then come up with a reorganized transition period, so that you also don't want to make it endless. There must be an end to it. But I believe that between now and December, many of the things that were contemplated cannot be achieved. And it would do no harm, in my view, if one more year were to be added to the entire process, so that you do all these things, create a stable situation. Look at what is happening in Rennes with the people who are coming in from Khartoum, from Sudan. And even in terms of registering people for voting, insecurity, look at the rains that affected and caused internally displaced persons, the heat that is now in Juba, and all these combination of factors. And I believe that there are conversations going on. And I hope and pray that the politicians will look at these issues and be in a position to come with a realistic timetable. And I hope, this is one of the problems that I have with East Africa, that because people are so wedded to sovereignty, none will be bold enough to tell South Sudan that you must do this. And remember that President Kiir is now the chair. So there is a sense in which people will not want to offend him. But yet I believe that these are the kind of conversations. I know the Sentegitio process has now terminated. The Kenyans will be midwifing this process, and I hope that we'll play a positive role and rethink and re-examine the timetable so that it is not only the politicians who are ready, but the people themselves are also made ready. Easier said than done, but once again in that memorandum that you are going to write, these are the kind of things that you are going to say. And even if you don't get, and through social media in a very organized way, you can cause this kind of conversation to begin to take place. You can do this letter not to the president, but also do this letter to parliamentarians. Do all this letter to all the political players, both within and without South Sudan. You will have made your contribution in that way. So I hope that you'll do that going forward and that somebody will listen. And sometimes it is not just about people listening. Sometimes they don't listen, but history will record that you played your part. Many times people don't listen, but you just say it. I keep on telling, how many of you here are Christians? If you are Christian, do you know that when, and I always imagine to look at Christ, that when Christ was crucified, he led a ministry. His own disciples had very different ideas. There are some of them who said, this gentleman who is the Son of God, when we are close to him, we are going to govern, we are going to enjoy ourselves. That is what they must have thought. And when he was crucified, you know, the fellows, some of them went back to fishing. They were disappointed. They said, this ministry is a complete failure. But then something happened. In the journey to Emmaus, something happened on the day of the Pentecost. And these cowards suddenly became brave individuals. And 2,000 years later, what you thought was a failure is a success, whether you like it or not. If you look at things in that way, then you are not too quick to judge yourself. The results of what you are doing may not be immediate, but you will have made those attempts. Bringing me to industrialization. You know, if you look at what we have as, first of all, what was the question of East African integration, having a common market, a customs union, and then a monetary union, and then ultimately a political integration, is that we wanted to ensure that there is trade. And you've talked about different sectors. Look at agriculture. One of the things that we used to have in this part of the world was cotton. And many of you who are in Uganda, we used to have Nitel ginger. In Kisumu, we had Kisumu cotton mills. We were wearing clothes that were actually made here because we could gin and tan, and even leather we are tanning and that kind of thing. What happened? We killed our industries, and today what Europe cannot have stopped consuming is what we wear. That is how the second-hand clothing industry is very big. And remember that one of the things under God, we had to sign, Kenya I think had to accept to continue importing second-hand clothing. And why do they need to bring second-hand clothing to this part of the world? Because they are not biodegradable. So we are actually a dumping ground. Second-hand computers, why are they brought here? Second-hand fridges, refrigerators, why are they brought here? Uganda, East Africa said that we will stop importing second-hand clothing. I don't know whether South Sudan is part of that or not. You are not. But Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Rwanda agree. Uganda, I think, are now imposing it. Rwanda are imposing it. We are not. So what is now beginning to happen, if you want to trade in second-hand clothing, you import through Kenya and then you re-export them to Rwanda and Burundi. So that kills our textile industry. If you look at industrialization, when we were growing up, we had copper in Kasese, in Uganda. If you look at the situation in South Sudan, you had the Zande scheme in 1947. All these things, all these things died. And my understanding of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area and the whole idea of having minimum content in order for a good to be considered a South Sudanese good for purposes of the market is to begin to industrialize. If you look at South Sudan today, South Sudan produces oil. And one would expect and one would desire that there is a modular refinery in South Sudan, and they can now be made between, I think, between $5.7 million you can actually do a modular refinery just to satisfy the local South Sudanese market. And then you export. And when you do a modular refinery, it means that the byproducts are also there for fertilizer and that kind of thing. Then you can also generate power. I do not know how many megawatts of electricity South Sudan is more than 1,000, less than 1,000. You are using generators. Kenya, we claim from Egypt. Then Kenya, we do about 3,000. Ethiopia now, with the Inga Dam, I think will generate when full capacity 10,000 megawatts. So it is true that it can't be done, but we must have the technology. And it is in the context of East Africa that we can actually acquire the technology, because we have the market. If you combine the East African market, we have a population here of about 50 million. Tanzania, give it another 60 million, that is about 110. Uganda, give it another 45 million. You are going to 200. South Sudan, give it another 300 million people here. That is a big market. That is almost as big as the market of the United States of America. And we have appetite for those goods, but we must have energy. Once you have energy, then we must have technology. Even if we don't have it now, we must make people like Chinese who are trading with us say, within 5 years you'll transfer technology. And that we can only do in the context of East African community. And I hope that these are some of the things that, some of the conversations that we must begin to have. Him who is a parliamentarian, I would expect that South Sudan must now begin to say, for example, that if we want to have South Sudanese goods to enjoy the benefits of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, if you have gold, that gold must not go out as ore. If you have cobalt, if you have coltan, that, and it can't be done. Within 10 years, it's possible to do some of these achievements. Uganda is now beginning to do assembly of cars, Kira, because they are getting technology, I think, from Korea. In the next 10 years, they'll no longer be doing components. Nobody makes components even of this thing at one place. This thing is possibly Chinese, it's Canadian. It's Canadian, but it's possible that it's actually made in China, but it's Canadian. In other words, the technology. So you can have the component, this component being made in Sudan, this component being made in Burundi, and then they are assembled in Rwanda. These are the kind of things that I expect that in the next 10 years, if we are serious about integration, serious about Africa Continental Free Trade Area, it can be done. But I conclude with this. I think we are not doing a good job. I flew last week from Addis Ababa to Bamako in Mali. We had a big aircraft, the 787 Dreamliner. Half of the population were Chinese. Half of the travelers were Chinese. Half of them alighted in Bamako, Mali, and I believe the other half were going to Dakar in Senegal. And they were the ages your age, 20 and 30. How many of you have ever been to Bamako? Yeah, but the point I'm making, they have come all the way from Shanghai, wherever they are in Bamako. In the next 10 years, they'll be the experts in Burkina, in Niger, in Ouagadougou. I met one in Ogun State, in Nigeria. How many of you have been to Ogun State, in Nigeria? Part of our problem in Africa, we are not curious. We Africans are satisfied with our immediate environment. That is why we are enslaved and colonized. If you are Zande, you go 7 kilometers from your home, you say, that is another world. So we must be curious. Thank you very much.
very much. Professor, it's an honor and a privilege to have you today. Thank you. That was good. I thought I would tell you how to clap. Hey, you guys were ready. Thank you so much, and thank you for your time. And
But there's somebody who got if, the poem if,
Yes.
and somebody who knows how to read. Read it. You read it like you are reading a poem. Just
you have it. Anyone who is poetic.
Yeah, give
We
him a
need-
microphone.
All right,
He's a
she's
good,
here.
He's a good.
Yes, poetic. Poetic.
She looks like a poet.
Thank you. I'll take the privilege. If you, it was written by Rudyard Kipling, for those that were looking for it, and the title is Brother Square, Toes, Reward and Fairies. If you can keep your head when all you are losing theirs, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give away to hating, and yet don't look too good, nor talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by nerves to make a trip for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to broken, and stoop and build them up with worn out tools, if you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one time of pitch and toss, and lose and start again at your beginnings, and never breathe a word about your loss, if you can force your heart and nerve and snare to serve your time long after they are gone, and so hold on when there is nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you but none too much, if you can feel the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that is in it, and which is more, you will be a man, my son.
Whoa. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Quietly. And even you can frame it and just listen to it. You learn something from it on a daily basis.